guys. I want to welcome you to the relaunch of the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast, and I'm so glad that you're joining me here. A little bit about me, I have had this passion to share my story and encourage and empower moms. And 2020 definitely gave me the space of mind that I needed to have this conversation and also kind of just plan out what I wanted to do. So I'm excited that you're here and I'm so grateful for your support. So, first things first, I want to start with a very funny story. So, my daughter is now 2. So, this goes back to when I was pregnant. So, I was pregnant, and my husband and I went to a ultrasound appointment. And the way the place worked is that they would like give you a CD of the ultrasound afterwards, and you could go home and watch it, and do whatever you wanted to do with it. But you had a CD of it. Well, the problem is that I have a Mac, so I could not play the CD, and my husband has I think an HP or a Lenovo computer, so he could have been able to do it. And just a big like disclaimer, whatever. My husband's in IT, so he is like the tech guy in our house. So we come home, and a few hours go by, and I take a nap, and I wake up, and I'm like, "Hey, honey, did you download the CD for me so I can play it on my computer? And I want to send it to my sister." And he's like, "Oh, I didn't get a chance to." And I immediately like just like go into cuckoo mode and I start crying. And he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not okay. You don't care about our baby and you don't love me and you could have done this if you knew that it was important to me." And he's like, "What?" And so he has this like just startled look like, "Okay, what is going on with her?" And so I'm crying, crying, crying. And at some point in my crying, I realized that I'm being a realistic, but you know how you're on a tangent and you don't want to stop. So I didn't want to stop, right? So I decide that I'm just going to keep crying because even though I've come to my senses, I don't want him to think I'm going crazy. So I cry, 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 and I go in the bed and I cover myself. And he's like standing like at the bedside and he's like, "Are you okay? Do I need to call your doctor? Like, I don't know. I just don't think this is like normal for you." And I'm like, "Yes, I'm fine. Okay." Anyway, long story short, I realized that I was being hormonal, but I was not gonna back down. So he went ahead and like downloaded the CD for me, and all was well. But it literally wasn't until like my daughter was 1 that I told him. I was like, "Hey, by the way, that one day, like I already knew I was going crazy, but I just didn't want to stop, so I just kept going." Anyway, that is to preface our conversation about peripartum mood disorders and kind of an opening to sharing my story. And this is a vulnerable thing for me, but I really want it to be about my listeners and the moms that may be struggling who just don't have a way of figuring it out. And I just want to be a voice to those women. So, going back to postpartum mood disorders, a lot of the times I think we associate postpartum depression as the only thing that happens to you after having a baby. However, and this is not medical knowledge, I'm just sharing my experience and my story. Um, like the mood disorders and mental health disorders in women don't just happen postpartum. So there's like a title coin that's like peripartum mood disorder. So it's like like trying to conceive and like any mood disorders that might happen then, and then during your pregnancy, what sometimes we classify as just being hormonal, and like sometimes maybe the beginning of depression when you're pregnant, and then postpartum. So I shared the funny story because I think when I look back, I could kind of tell that I was having like responses that I don't usually have to situations. And that was probably my red flag, but I didn't consider it such. I just was like, "Oh, I'm just hormonal. I'm just, I'm having a girl. I have all this, circulating estrogen. It's probably just like I have extra hormones." End of story. So looking back, I can see that is when the post peripartum like issue started. And just going towards pregnancy, we had a pretty easy trying to conceive session. well, not really a session. We had ease trying to conceive. We knew that we only wanted one child, and so we went into it with a mindset like it's going to happen. And fortunately for us, and I know this is not the story for many couples, we conceived our first round of trying, and um, it just happened easily for us. And I knew that I wanted a girl, and I was so excited when I found out I was having a girl. And I think I was having second thoughts about like having one or two, but I felt like once I knew it was a girl, I was like, okay, I think we're good. And that's not to say that I wouldn't be happy with a boy. I just knew that I wanted to be a girl mom to start with. Anyway, so pregnancy was good. I had a history of pulmonary embolism, which was a blood clot in my lung. And so I was under the care of my OB and also my hematologist. And the team could not have been any better. They managed it so well, and they just like they made it just easy for me. Fast forward, I had my daughter. I went in for a scheduled induction, and my daughter is not the kind of person to be told when to come or what to do when. So my water broke in the middle of the night prior to the morning when I was supposed to start Pitocin. And I progressed labor. Everything went well. Baby was born healthy. There was a little bit of a concern because I spiked a fever right before delivery, but everything went well. She arrived 39 weeks exactly. And I just remember thinking, okay, let's do this. Let's figure it out. They asked me at the hospital what the plan was for feeding, and I knew I wanted to breastfeed. So I put my daughter on the breast, and they said, yeah, the milk is just going to come. And so a couple of hours into it, I was like, I don't know about this milk situation. I just don't feel like it's coming. And we had such great nurses postpartum. Like I just could not be more grateful for those nurses in the hospital where I delivered. However, this is a big but. The hospital that I had my daughter was a baby friendly hospital. And if you're not familiar with that, I will actually be sharing a little bit of like some funny quips about my thoughts on baby friendly hospitals and why I just think that there needs to be a mommy friendly initiative in that initiative. So anyway, my daughter's born. We do skin to skin. It was the greatest thing. Milk doesn't come in, but I'm not sweating it. And a few hours in, I remember asking the nurse, hey, like, how do I know if she's hungry? Like, she's crying, she's frustrated. The nurse was like, don't worry, mom, just keep putting baby on the boob. It's going to be okay. So I put baby on boob and nothing was coming. And in hindsight, like, I felt like I prepared so well for birth and being a mom, but there's two things that I didn't prepare adequately for. And one was breastfeeding, and the second thing was an awareness of what mental changes happen when you have a baby. I'm just being honest because I'm a planner and I did a lot of research, but those are two areas that I felt like I fell short in preparation for the delivery. So another interesting thing about the baby friendly initiative was that the encouragement of skin to skin and keeping the lanugo, like the layer of like whatever they had in your womb, like on their skin on. And for me, like I kind of struggled with that a little bit because baby girl was born. She had like some blood on her hair, and I was like, okay, are we gonna wash the baby? Because like I come from a culture where like bathing is like, I don't know, I feel like it's a big thing. And so I was like, are you gonna clean the baby? And the nurse was like, no, mom, like skin to skin, and we like to keep that lanugo on there. And I was just like, oh, the baby has blood on her hair, and we need to wash the baby, but it was fine. My milk didn't come in, and I started getting stressed. I, with my healthcare background, was like, this child is hungry. She's getting hypoglycemic. Can somebody feed my child? And so, after a few conversations, our nurse brought us some formula. And the weirdest thing was how we had to administer this formula. And we had to like open up her cheek and like squirt it with a syringe, and she just sucked it all up. The next morning after delivery, my our pediatrician, we had actually never met her, but we had researched her very well, and so she came to see the baby. And thank God for her because she was like, Mom, like, what is going on? And I was like, I'm just stressed. I don't feel like the baby's eating. And she looked at my husband and she goes, You go home and bring some bottles, and we're going to give this baby formula until we figure out what's happening with mama's milk. And thank God for Dr. Patty. Like, she's a saint. That just like eased my anxieties. And so we we went home postpartum day 2. So I went in on a Monday for induction. Baby was born Tuesday. We went home Thursday. We had made this commitment to spend the first 2 weeks of our daughter's life as a family, just the three of us, just to kind of establish our dynamic and to help each other like figure it out and like bond with our baby when it's just the two of us. In hindsight, like, it was a very romanticized idea of how this situation was going to be, and I'm just being honest. Like, I still don't regret doing it, but looking back, that was probably not the smartest thing to do with a first time child. Okay, like, I'm just going to be honest. So we go home and everything's beautiful, we are happy, baby's happy, we are still haven't figured out the sleep situation, but we're fine. And we just settle into a routine. My milk comes in, I'm pumping, I'm having issues latching, but it's fine. Like, I felt like I was handling the stress just fine. And at some point within the first 2 weeks, I just decided for my peace of mind that I would just exclusively pump because I was having latching issues. And I actually had a lactation consultant come and see us, and she didn't think I had a latch issue. My issue was that she was really, really sweet. And like, this is nothing against her. But when I opened the door to let her into my home, I could smell cigarette smoke. And I have asthma and I'm very sensitive to like certain smells. And so my focus really wasn't in the conversation. Like, my focus was, how can I get this conversation over with so she can leave before I have an asthma attack with a newborn? So looking back, that didn't help the situation. Anyway, so my daughter was thriving, everything was going well. My husband was home all the time. And the second week, my mom showed up and it was great. Like, my mom's love language is cooking. And so we had all these meals. And when I tell you that I gained more weight in that transition phase than I did when I was pregnant, like, I'm not even exaggerating. Anyway, so we had a great time with my mom and we were just like going through the flow. And then it happened. I was sitting with my husband eating, and I remember looking at him, and I don't remember what he was eating, but I got so upset because he was making noises with his mouth. And I think he was eating like potato chips, like something that you would obviously hear. And I got up and I went upstairs and I grabbed some earplugs and I came back downstairs and I sat at the dining table and I continued eating. And he was like, Are you okay? And I'm like, Yeah, I'm fine. I just can't stand the way you're chewing. And he was like, Okay, all right. Fast forward, my best friend was coming to meet my daughter. She was going to be my daughter's godmother. And so we were having my daughter's baptism. And I was so looking forward to that experience and bonding with her. And then a little bit before my pregnancy, my in-laws also expressed interest in coming. And so we were going to have this big family gathering. And in the meantime, we had also decided we were going to sell our house. We were living in a patio home at the time, and we were just kind of too close to our neighbors. And we just really wanted like our own space. And so my husband talked to me into, let's sell this house, let's get out of here, let's move to a new house. Great. So now I have three stressors: the stress of having a baby, the stress of selling and buying a house, and the stress of just having family over and entertaining them and keeping them occupied. And by all means, like, they were so helpful and they meant well, but I was also in a very like controlling stage of my motherhood journey, so I didn't trust that anybody could figure anything out for my child like I could. And so I just was like, if my mother-in-law offered to bathe the baby, I'm like, no, 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 I'll do it, I'll get it, it's fine, you just rest. Looking back, like, I should have just let her. Like, I should have just let the people that were offering to help me because they meant well. But at the time, I was like, I'm the only one that can do this for my kid, and I'm the only one that figured it out. So I'm doing it. I'm doing it. I don't need your help. So my breaking point came on one of the days, and I remember my best friend had left to go visit a friend out of town, and she was going to come back. And I just kind of felt like this panic, like I need to talk to somebody. And she wasn't there. And I was getting kind of annoyed with my husband, and I was just having these like angry feelings that I couldn't place. I couldn't understand why I was angry. Like, I'm happy I have this baby. She's like, the joy of our life. She's like great. And like, I just can't seem to not be angry. What is my problem? And I had a friend who had sought counseling postpartum. And so I found this um, place called the Center for Postpartum Family Health, and I made an appointment. And I show up, and I'm still in denial. I'm like, I don't have PPD. I'm fine. I'm not crying. I'm not happy. I'm not having thoughts of harming my child. I'm totally fine. Nobody argue about that. I'm fine. And I go there and I take the test. And I remember the therapist, Kim, walked in and she was like, you scored really high on that. And I was like, no, no, I don't have postpartum depression. I'm just like here to figure out why I feel all sorts of wrong. And she was like, well, you do have postpartum depression. And we started the journey of figuring it out. And my postpartum depression was really postpartum rage and postpartum anxiety. And when I was able to sit down and list the things that I was feeling, the things that I was sensing, I realized that that is not innate to who I am as a person. I am not generally an anxious person, and usually I'm like in control of what's happening in my life. And so that's how I started my postpartum journey. And I was so grateful because this place just had all the resources I needed. I talked to my primary care provider and we worked up a plan, and my mental health was definitely on the right track. And I will say that, the stressors that like I still had in my life, they didn't change, but I had like the tools that I needed to make those decisions for the future. Like, if I had a situation where I was just being unrealistic, then I would sit down and ask myself, what do you know to be true? And that really helped me like just get back in what I needed. And I was also very grateful because during the transition and we're moving and my husband had to go back to traveling, I reached out to my boss and I said, hey, can I please have a couple of extra weeks? And so I ended up taking 4 months off from maternity leave, which was such a godsend. And my journey with postpartum rage and postpartum anxiety, it's had its ups and downs. And I wouldn't say like, oh yeah, I'm cured, I'm great. Like, I do have those like little bits and pieces of moments where I can tell when I don't feel 100% myself. And the greatest thing that I got out of therapy is being able to recognize the signs and also the tools that I received in therapy to be aware of when I'm not me and how do I navigate that. And I'm so grateful for my support system, especially my husband and my girlfriends and just really my family. Like, I reached out to my sister and I told her about my depression. And actually, up to today, I've never shared it with my mom, which is another story all to itself. She'll probably find out when she listens to this podcast if she does. But I did struggle with the cultural like sense of being an African. Like, how can you not figure this out? Like, women have been having children for thousands of years. What is wrong with you? And so the reason I decided to restart my podcast with this conversation is because one, I think we need to normalize like postpartum mental health and actually really peripartum like mental health, right? We need to be talking about why these things happen, and that if it does happen and if you feel, a certain way, like you're not alone, and no woman should feel that she should suffer because it's a sign of weakness. I recently came across a song and like the main line was, it's okay not to be okay. And as women, especially in the caregiving professions, we feel the need to always be on top of everything and always just have like a sense of control and figure it out. And you don't have to figure it out. That's why we have mental health professionals, and that's why we have all these resources. And if we're not having these conversations now, when should we be having them? And really, like, my goal here is not to scare any woman or make motherhood seem like this crazy thing, but my goal here is to raise awareness and also like reach out to anybody that might be going through something like that and say, hey, ask for help. It's not a sign of weakness. You need help. And if you don't get help on time, it could get worse. It could escalate into self harm or harm to your family or harm to your baby. And, we have the resources to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I go back to something that happened. I'm in a mom group, and I remember this mom had posted on one week, like her child had a tongue tie and she had another baby at home, and she was just kind of just venting. And a couple of weeks later, it was a story in the media, and I'm not going to get into the details of it. But I just remember having this like mind thing. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, I remember when I read her original post, like, she's not coping well. And she's coming to the mom group to just express herself, and it's really a judgment free zone. But I just wondered, like, what if, we had read into that concern and said, hey, have you talked to somebody about this? Are you feeling thoughts of self harm or thoughts of harming the baby? How can we help you? How can we support you? Or even if we can't, like, here are some resources that you can invest in and get the help that you need. And that would have been so important, and it would have prevented this catastrophe that ended up happening with her family, and it just tore her family apart. And so I remember when I like read the news coverage on her story, and everybody was like, "Oh, she's so smart. How can you do that? You're so intelligent, and you're in the healthcare profession." And I just kept thinking, they don't know what they don't know. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It has nothing to do with your history and your family or your society, like where you are in society and your socioeconomic status. It does not matter. Like, the things that happen to a woman's brain when you have a child, we're just starting to scratch the surface, right? And there was an article, it was in the Boston Globe, and the lady who wrote this article, she basically had this like moment where she was like, why are we not talking about the things that happen when you get pregnant? Why are we not talking about the changes in your brain? Like, they've studied like the changes in your gray matter that happen when you have a child. We always talk about oxytocin, the feel good hormone, and that's all fine and dandy. But what about the mind, the brain changes that happen during pregnancy, postpartum? And how do we navigate those transitions and support women, and have an awareness that this is what happens when you have a child, and here's some ways you can cope. I read something, and I'm just going to look at it and read it. And it talked about a surge of oxytocin at childbirth triggers changes that allow a woman quite literally to sync her baby through a coordination of biology, synchronized brain responses and heart rates and behavior, matching responses in gaze, touch, and vocalization. That intense connection teaches a baby from the very first day how to relate to another person. And this was by Ruth Fieldman, who is a professor of developmental and neuroscience at the Interdisciplinary Center in Israel. And so, when we connect with others, that's like a primal like response, right? However, let's talk more about what happens to, the changes that happen to a mother's brain. And let's prepare women for that, right? Like, I'm not saying, oh, yeah, you're going to have all these changes, you're going to go crazy. I'm saying, here's an awareness of what could happen to your brain when you have a child, and here's ways you can cope. And in doing so, we empower women and we empower ourselves to be prepared for those things that happen. Um, so, one of the things I talked about in the article is that after childbirth, the volume of gray matter in the mother's brain changes dramatically, particularly in the regions involved in social processes and theory of mind, or the ability to attribute emotion and mental states to other people, which are key in raising a human. The degree of change enough that researchers could easily sort the women who had had a pregnancy from those who hadn't. It surprised one of the people who did this research in Netherlands, because she was just like, wow, like the degree of change is significant, right? Um, The other thing that researchers found was that the anxiety or hypervigilance that many new moms feel peaks in the first month postpartum and then diminishes. But researchers suspect that other effects linger, shaping mothers even well past their child rearing years or even influencing their relationship with future grandchildren. And like for me, and I preface it like I'm not a natural like worrying person because I had the knowledge that I had, like even with discussions about sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. I just remember when my child started sleeping through the night, which was a godsend. I still struggled in the morning. Like I would go open the door and I would be worried that something had happened to her at night. And looking back, like that's a primal response. Like my job as her mother is to always just worry about her and not worry in a negative aspect. Like my job as her mother is to protect her. And so having those feelings made me human. However, the when the feelings started impacting my sanity, then thankfully I sought help when I needed to, right? So one of the things that came up also in that article was the conversation about what would happen if we gave expectant moms even a basic understanding of how and why their brains change. Would it help these moms cope with the unfamiliar emotional experiences that are often part of healthy experiences of new motherhood? Might it open a door for women who experience more problematic symptoms to talk with their loved ones or their doctor? Could it help some women to feel empowered by their own biology? What was interesting was that the author of this article, she actually met with a guy who had researched like connection and like the changes to a mom's brain. And she asked him, like, you think we should be like having these conversations? And the guy was like, no, like I have the conversations if the moms want to have it. And that was surprising to her because she was like, wait, what? You came up with this theory and you don't think we should be talking about it? And he was like, no, like if the moms want to have a conversation about it, then that's fine. If they don't want to have a conversation about it, that's fine too. Anyway, so the reason I talk about that is because I'm not saying like, hey, we need to meet all these pregnant women and say, oh my gosh, this are the things that happen to your brain. You need to like be ready for it. I'm saying we need to have an awareness as women of what happens to a woman's brains. And if it's a friend that you're close to and you can share your experiences with them and be vulnerable, or just, if you see a friend struggling and say, hey, you know, I think that what you're going through is a normal biological response. However, these are the signs you should be looking for if you cross that threshold. So, for example, if you have thoughts of self-harm, if you have thoughts of harming the baby, if just you don't feel that you are equipped to be mentally taking care of that child, ask for help. Because the worst thing we can do is refuse to be vulnerable and then end up hurting ourselves or our families. And so I really wanted to open this, season of my podcast with that conversation because I truly believe in vulnerability, but I also believe that, it's one thing to be vulnerable, but what are the actionable steps that somebody who comes up with a vulnerable experience can provide? And so my parting shot is, if you're a mom, if you're pregnant or you're planning on getting pregnant, have the awareness of the fact that these changes happen to your brain. Normalize conversations around mental health for women. Let's normalize conversations around postpartum mental health disorders and peripartum mental health disorders. And this includes, postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum rage. It's a wide array of emotions. And if there's anything I want to share from my experience, it's this. You don't have to be crying or thinking of harming yourself for you to have PPD, right? If you just feel that you're out of your norm and out of sorts, just ask for help. The worst that could happen is you need help, right? The best that could happen is, hey, it's a phase you're going through, you're going to get through it. And I'm here to tell you that there is help out there and there's so many resources. And I'll be linking some resources in the show notes to help women um, who just may not know who to turn to or just don't want to be vulnerable. And if you find yourself in company that doesn't allow you to be vulnerable and wants you to show up as the perfect version of yourself every single time, you need to look for new circles, and you need to surround yourself with people who allow you to be and allow you to be human, because in doing so you can be vulnerable and you can have courage. And I always say I'm a big Brene Brown fan, and I just love the work that she's done on vulnerability and just like making women and human beings aware that there's nothing to be ashamed of if you show up as the real version of yourself, because that's who you really are, and that's who that's who the world needs to see. And show up for yourself, show up for your family, and just let's do this motherhood thing together and let's figure it out. If you need to vent and share your experience, please, 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 feel free to reach out. I'm mostly active on social media, on Instagram. It's the stethoscopes two swaddles, or you can email me, and I'll link my email in the show notes. I'm just grateful for this platform, and I'm so grateful for the women who have supported me and allowed me to share my voice. I want you to know that you're not alone, and you're doing a great job, Mama. You really are. No matter how you feel that you showed up today, you woke up and you showed up, and that counts. And whenever you feel that you are not really rocking this motherhood thing, I want you to remember that child chose you as his or her mommy, whether by birth, whether by adoption, whether by fostering. That child chose you. And so own it. Own the fact that you are an amazing mom. And if you ever need somebody to remind you that, give me a shout. I'll be here. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave a review to the podcast. I'm so excited to be back on this journey. Have a great day.